Welcome back to the Walking in the Word series. We're talking about the first sign and discourse in today's Walking in the Word video. And we're going to talk about what a sign is. We need to review that before we get into the rest of this. So in the Bible, a sign is something that proves. So you have to remember when we talk about sign, you first have to determine what that means and define that term. And in the biblical sense, it is something that proves. So that means the signs Jesus did were to prove he is who he said he is, which is God. Simple enough. So let's read the text first, and then we're going to go into observing the text, and then we're going to apply the text. Okay. So on the third day, there was a wedding at Cana in Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. Jesus also was invited to the wedding with his disciples. When the wine ran out, the mother of Jesus said to him, "They have no wine." And Jesus said to her, "Woman, what does this have to do with me? My hour has not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Now there were 6 stone water jars there for the Jewish rites of purification, each holding 20 or 30 gallons. Jesus said to the servants, "Fill the jars with water." And they filled them up to the brim. And he said to them, "Now draw some out and take it to the master of the feast." So they took it. When the master of the feast tasted the water, now become wine, and did not know where it came from, though the servants who drew the water knew, the master of the feast called the bridegroom and said to him, "Everyone serves the good wine first, and when people have drunk freely, then the poor wine. But you have kept the good wine until now." This is the first of his signs Jesus did at Cana in Galilee and manifested his glory, and his disciples believed in him. So let's observe the text. We know where this is happening. This is at Cana in Galilee. When this is happening is at the start of Jesus's ministry, okay? And it's at a wedding, on the third day, it says specifically, there was a wedding in Cana of Galilee. I love how the Bible is very specific, showing us that it is a historical document. Notice here also that Jesus never calls Mary by her name. We know her name is Mary from other gospels, but when it says Jesus's mother, how John refers to her, it's showing that it doesn't mean that Mary is insignificant by any means, but the emphasis is not on Jesus's mother. John doesn't even use his own name in the Gospel of John. He calls himself the disciple whom Jesus loved. So you'll also see that John mentions Jesus's hour many times. His hour had not yet come. And Jesus mentions here to his mother, what does this have to do with me? My hour has not yet come. So the hour is tied to the cross. His hour has not yet come. Whenever you see that going forward in John, it's always referring to specifically to the cross. So God's specific plan to work out the mission of his son was the cross. And the cross is not a sad incident. It's the fulfillment of everything Jesus did in his ministry. And this is where we see that. So we see the who, we're talking about Jesus, we're talking about John and his disciples, we're talking about his mother Mary, and we're talking about when and where they were in Cana and Galilee. And what they were talking about was water into wine. Okay. So there's a little history of the jars in this chapter. There were 6 jars here that they referenced specifically made of stone that held 20 to 30 gallons of liquid. And the jars were for purification purposes. Back in these days, there's a custom to wash people's feet. The servants would wash their feet before they ate and things like that. So they're jars for purification. And in this case, they were filled with wine. The good wine was always brought first because once people got drunk, they don't care what they're drinking after that, right? They're drunk, they're eating, drinking, and being merry. And so after the good wine, everybody's had their fill, the poor wine comes out. And what I think is kind of ironic here is that I always think Mary knew to ask Jesus. So she goes over to him and she's like, "Hey, they need wine. They're out of wine." And one of the teachers that we have that goes over this with us, he talks about how if they run out of wine, it's kind of like also a sign, like it's an embarrassment. If you look at the customs of weddings back in the first century culture, you'll see why it was so important that they have the wine, that they keep the wine coming, that they put the good wine before the poor wine and things. So what is this specific sign? Like, why is it water to wine? Everybody says, "Oh, Jesus did it for his mom." It just goes to show how much he loved her. I'm sure Jesus loved his mother. He made sure that she was taken care of when he was on the cross, specifically handing her over to John in John's care and saying, "This is your son, this is your mother," right? While he's on the cross. But I don't think that it's so much about fulfilling a miracle for his mom as much as about what this sign means. And it's a sign of provision, not just a miraculous event. Philippians 4:19 tells us, my God will supply every need of yours according to his riches and glory in Christ Jesus. So this turning water into wine is supernatural. It's something only God can do. It's a provision that only God can meet. So water to wine shows us physical transformation. It's taking a substance and completely transforming it. And Jesus is going to talk about spiritual transformation all throughout the Gospels, because that's what he's really concerned about. I don't know that it's so important that Jesus made sure they had good wine as much as they realized that he's the one who could take something like water and transform it. And meaning that that's a type of what he can do with our lives. So one of the things to note here is the response, and which I really appreciate that. This is only 11 verses. So this video is going to be a lot shorter with the first sign and discourse, but the verse 11 shows us the response, and his disciples believed in him. So when they saw the sign and knew that Jesus changed water to wine, his disciples believed in him is so significant. The entire purpose of John's gospel is that we believe and know that Jesus is the Son of God. And that's why Jesus did what he did, not just because he loved his mom, not just because he's trying to make good wine for a wedding, but so that we would believe in him. So John points us back to that purpose here. Everything Jesus did was to point us to the Father and to prove he is who he said he is. So what does this show me about God? It shows me that he is the only one who can supply our needs when it comes to transforming power, right? He is the one who can take a need that nobody else can fill and fill it for us. And it shows us also that Jesus did everything purposefully with a purpose. And how do I apply that to my life? I can go to him in every need, know that he can take a physical thing and supply my need, but he can also do that in my life with his transforming power. So again, everything Jesus did was to point us to the Father and to prove he is who he said he is. Thank God for that. In the next video, we'll talk about the second sign.